Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. Americans remain firm in their support of expanding education freedom and providing parents and families the authority to hold officials accountable, according to a new national survey. Joining me to tell us more about this is the Center Square's education reporter, Esther Wickham. Esther, tell us a little bit more about this survey and what it found.
Yeah, thanks, Eliana. This past week, Yes Every Kid Foundation conducted a poll across the nation, asking over 60 parents, multiple national surveys, multiple state-specific surveys, and kind of compiled that data all together, specifically about K through 12 education, multiple different subcategories coming from, their thoughts on open enrollment, federal involvement in schools, as well as parental accountability, and ultimately who has the final say in K through 12 decisions. Should it be the federal, state government, or parents and families? And there was a ton of different results. And in general, we saw that a lot of Americans do in fact support education freedom. As more information is coming out about the U.S. public school system, the administration, and also the Center Square has reported on a ton of surveys and a ton of data that has come out that enrollment in U.S. public schools are declining. And something we talked about in the past is a lot of these old school buildings are being converted into apartments. We're seeing not only enrollment decline, but also a lack of students wanting to go to public schools. They're doing alternative schooling, they're homeschooling, private education, charter schools. And that's a huge factor because of, the pandemic. A lot of parents got to see firsthand what's happening within the public school system. And, they want to change. Not only that, but there is, huge financial burden. We see a lot of school districts have a massive budget deficit. And at the same time, student test scores are declining. They're at an all-time low across the board with multiple different states, but also nationally. That has slowly decreased. Whether it's fourth graders, eighth graders, high school graduates, we are seeing these students kind of going into the college field and then graduating from the college field and entering the workforce system, and they are simply just not prepared. And so what this poll really resulted in is that parents are concerned, and parents are not really wanting to trust the system. They want to be involved. They want the authority to have a say in their children's education, and they want more flexibility when it comes to that. And so within this poll conducted by YouGov America, they surveyed around 1,300 respondents. And, this was a massive range of different demographics. These were, parents, moms, dads, different racial groups, different political affiliations, Republicans, Democrats, independents, different income levels, high income, middle class, working class. And what we saw in general is that, they want more flexibility. And within this briefing, Scott Foster, who's the director of education in the marketplace and insights for Yes Every Kid Foundation, he presented all these findings kind of as a end of the year briefing, and looked at the different takeaways from state and national data. And like I had said before, this poll highlights from a bipartisan perspective that a majority of Americans support family first education policies. And something that he highlights is that parents and families are trusted more than anyone to make the best education decisions for their children. And a lot of educators, administrators, and education officials don't necessarily get those same gold stars. And so according to the survey, 64% of respondents support open enrollment. So open enrollment kind of creates that flexibility, doesn't affect, Americans' life if something happens or changes. And on top of that, 63% of respondents favor education savings accounts, and 58% support education tax credits. So these are things that, place authority and place power into parents' hands so they can have a say on their child's education and what exactly they need and resources from the state. Kind of looking currently though at K through 12 open enrollment laws, just kind of on a national level, they are simply kind of weak and ineffective. The Center Square was able to talk to a Reason Foundation policy expert who kind of was looking at open enrollment from a national perspective. And, they said that this is kind of a weak and ineffective system currently, and even though across all 50 states, people support this on a bipartisan level, right? According to this separate report by Reason Foundation, 84% of Republicans and 80% of Democrats support, expanding and updating open enrollment laws. Another thing the poll highlighted is that 54% of respondents say that education is a huge voting tool. They think that going into this next year for the midterm elections, that they would vote for a candidate and support a candidate who endorses and who values education freedom, family first policies. And I think this is not new, Eliana. I think that this is something that parents and families have definitely valued over the years. I just think that it's at a higher margin. I think newer parents potentially are kind of seeing that shift and that change. They want to see lawmakers that are supporting, these family friendly education policies. And so in general, we kind of see this trend. The poll highlights that parents over the years have just grown dissatisfied with the traditional public school system. And they think that, all kids are different, all kids are unique. And Foster, who was kind of going through this briefing, highlighted that the public school system likes to place this kind of one size fits all mentality. And parents are recognizing that just doesn't work. They want a more flexible education. They want a more personalized education for their children. And we're just simply not getting that within the US public school system. And so I think kind of wrapping it up, just an overview of the poll here, Eliana, is that parents agree that there should be more accountability for the education system, for the government, and that more power and more authority should be placed in the hands of parents, families, and ultimately children.
And in a similar vein, though it's not necessarily the same exact question, there's been a lot that's been done recently by the Trump administration to move in the direction of dismantling the Department of Education, which sort of ties into this question of who has the authority here. Did the poll touch on that at all?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the questions they asked, and I've kind of mentioned this before, about trust. Who do they trust more? And the three questions was, looking at the percentages, do we trust the federal government, state government, or parents and families when it comes to K through 12 decision making? Who should have the final say? What should that look like? And according to the poll, 56% of respondents, said that they do not trust the federal government on education issues, where kind of compared to the state level, there's 58% agreed that they do in fact trust state and local governments. Which in general, I think is a widely agreeable consensus against parents. They want it at the local level, they want it at the state level, because state laws do look different than federal laws when it comes to education. But by a huge contrast, 86% of respondents said that they trust parents more than the government when it comes to decisions on education. And I think this kind of ties into, like what you said about taking steps to dismantle the Department of Education. And I think a big component, which Foster kind of highlights in the briefing, is that there's a lack of accountability. How can parents hold the federal government accountable if they don't really know what's going on? How does the U.S. Department of Education actually work? And some parents, don't necessarily support the dismantling of the Department of Education because they simply don't know what the Department of Education does, what their functions are. And, this is something that Matt Frienderway, who is the vice president of strategy for Yes Every Kid Foundation, kind of answered in the briefing. The Center Square asked a question about, why do we think there is not a ton of support for dismantling the Department of Education? And something he kind of said was, well, there's kind of a lack of education around what the education department really does. And in this poll, once they kind of explained to these parents and to these respondents, hey, when we're saying that the administration is going to dissolve the Department of Education, they're going to reallocate this federal funding back to the states. As the Secretary of Education, Lyndon McMahon, has said multiple times, and the president has said multiple times, that they want to give power back to the states. They want to, cut the red tape, take out the bureaucracy of education, and give power back to the states. And something that they highlight in the poll is that there's just a lot of miscommunication and a lack of information about what that means. And so they're not, cutting federal funding. They're not going to be cutting programs, but they're simply just giving that authority back to the states and back to local districts and families. And I think what we saw is, as soon as, that was explained, these, misconceptions were kind of explained out, the opposition actually shifted in support, pointing to, there's low federal trust, and there's a desire, right, to shift back to the parents and back to the states. And so that's kind of what the foundation highlights, that these parents and these respondents that are a part of the poll understand that when we dismantle the Department of Education, the responsibility shifts, right? So since there's a lack of trust with the federal government, why don't we just give that trust, give that authority to parents and families? And I think in general, a lot of Americans would agree that they want to return power back to the states and back to families and parents, especially when it comes to K through 12 education decisions.
Well, Esther, thank you for your insights on this story. You can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.